one of the most talented, most decorated, elite quarterbacks in the NFL, has just agreed to a new contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm talking about Russell Wilson. Not only is he a 9-time Pro Bowler, he is a 1-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner, and he has his own sandwich at Subway. Not many quarterbacks in the NFL can say that, but Russell Wilson can. You see, he just agreed to terms with the Steelers for a contract worth $1.2 million. If you don't know, in the NFL, that is extremely cheap. Hell, that is the veteran minimum, and he is getting paid that. Absolute A+ value for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They could not have done better in free agency. Now, why is this? Well, maybe it's because the Denver Broncos are stuck paying Russell Wilson $37.8 million this season. And that is all the guaranteed money left over from his previous contract with the Denver Broncos. Instead of deciding to ride it out with Russell Wilson for the rest of his contract, they took more than $80 million in dead cap money. It's absolutely going to hurt the franchise for the next few years, but I'm sure they'll figure out some way to manage it. You know, everyone says it. The cap isn't real in the NFL because there's so many ways to work around it. The Denver Broncos will probably figure something out, but for now, it's looking terrible for them. Now, why did they even decide to move on from Russell Wilson? I'd argue he had one of his better seasons this last year, especially if you compare it to his first year with the Denver Broncos. I won't argue that Russell Wilson was very good, you know, his first season with the Broncos, but it was more of a rebuilding year. The head coach was Nathaniel Hackett. The pieces weren't really there for him to succeed, and this year, pretty much the same. I mean, the only thing that really changed was the head coach in Sean Payton, legendary head coach for the New Orleans Saints. You know, he had a few controversies pop up in his past, but he's back now, and he's a head coach for the Denver Broncos. He's supposed to lead them into the future, and in this future, Sean Payton doesn't see Russell Wilson alongside him. You know, it was very clear early on that these two just didn't click. They didn't mesh well. Sean Payton was out here during free agency, during, you know, training camp, calling out Russell Wilson, throwing a bit of shade at him. And that just didn't resonate with Wilson. They just didn't work from the very beginning. And then throughout the season, you see Sean Payton chewing up Russell Wilson on the sidelines in front of everybody. This was bound to fail from the start. And obviously, that is what ended up happening here. That is why the Pittsburgh Steelers are getting Russell Wilson on the low. And this is fantastic news for the Steelers organization. A team who has been stuck being mediocre since Ben Roethlisberger's prime. You see, there were a few years in the latter stages of Ben Roethlisberger's career where he wasn't very good, but the team was solid enough around him. The culture was there. Mike Tomlin doesn't lose, so they were still competing, but they weren't going to be fighting for a Super Bowl, and they weren't going to be at the bottom of the NFL, you know, with a top 5 pick, which led to a bit of mediocre play. And then after him, the same stuff continued with Kenny Pickett, with Mason Rudolph. It didn't matter who was QB, the team wasn't good enough for a Super Bowl, and yet Mike Tomlin wouldn't let them lose because he's that great of a head coach. So without any, you know, real chance to draft a young up-and-coming QB in the draft, this is the best case scenario for them. Not only do they get an ultra-talented quarterback in Russell Wilson, but they get him at the very low $1.2 million, which means they are able to build the best roster possible around him. And of course, the NFL isn't going to flag this because, like I said, the Denver Broncos are paying this man nearly $40 million. And every NFL analyst and nerd will tell you that for a team to have the best opportunity to compete for a Super Bowl, they need a quarterback on a really cheap contract, preferably a fantastic rookie quarterback who isn't getting paid very much before that first major contract hits. They'll tell you that's what you need if you want the best chance to succeed. I mean, look at Brock Purdy in San Francisco. This kid is barely getting paid anything. He was drafted with the last overall pick only a few years ago, and he'll continue to get paid barely anything. And he's over here taking them to Super Bowls. This is what you need to succeed in the NFL, is what they'll tell you. And over here, the Pittsburgh Steelers have just gotten a fantastic, NFL quarterback with experience in Russell Wilson for even cheaper than Brock Purdy. How they managed to pull that off? Unbelievable. I'm pretty sure Russell Wilson was the top sought-after quarterback in the NFL, and who really wants to go play in Pittsburgh, right? Not the prettiest city. I think there is only one reason, at least one main reason, why Russell Wilson selected the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that has to be because of Mike Tomlin. The head coach who hasn't had this team get a losing record since he's gotten there almost 2 decades ago. Since 2007, the Pittsburgh Steelers haven't had a losing record on the season. Of course, most of those seasons, half of them have been with 8 or 9 wins. Pretty mid, pretty average, but that's not a losing record nonetheless. They've done their best, especially under Mike Tomlin. So I see why Russell Wilson wants to go play there. Plus, they have a great top 10 scoring defense. Their defense really showed up last season. One of the main reasons they won 10 games. Not because Kenny Pickett was their quarterback or Mason Rudolph. It was because of the guys on the defensive side of the football. Plus, they have a pretty solid run game. Something I'm sure their new offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, will take advantage of. You got guys like Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren in your backfield. It's looking pretty nice. On the season, Najee Harris had about 1,000 rushing yards on the ground. The fact that he even got there was surprising because of how many carries he had to split with Jaylen Warren. Najee Harris got 255 carries on the season, 8 rushing touchdowns, while Jaylen Warren, his backup arguably, got 149 touches, 784 rushes on the ground, and 4 touchdowns. And if we simply take a look at Russell Wilson's stats from last season, it becomes very clear that he wasn't the problem in Denver, okay? He had 26 touchdowns on the season in only 15 games. Can you guess what his interceptions were? Yeah, under 10. He had 8 interceptions on the season, threw for 3,000 passing yards, and that's saying something. Because in a lot of the games, early on in the season, the Denver Broncos were out of it. Talk about the Miami Dolphins game. Yeah, we're being real. Russell Wilson didn't play like half that game because the defense gave up 70 points. What is a guy like Russell Wilson supposed to do when your defense gives up a near record-breaking 70 points in a game? Hell, the backups for the Miami Dolphins were cooking them. And then later on in the season, there's all this drama in Denver, and it just gets worse with the Broncos asking Russell Wilson, to change up his contract, tweak it so that it benefits them and hurts him in the long run, because if he gets a potential injury now, he won't be getting paid out the same. That's basically what the Broncos were asking Russell Wilson to do, and they said, if you didn't do it, we're benching you. And we kind of saw that happen at the end of the year. The Broncos were 7-8, and sure, they had a disappointing loss against the New England Patriots, where, Russell Wilson could have played better, didn't play very well in a must-win game. However, statistically, they weren't out of the playoff race yet, and they still decided to bench the guy. And then after, they somehow pulled off a win against the Chargers because Justin Herbert was injured, they still didn't start Russell Wilson. They said, you are done for the year. This relationship is not working. And then they, of course, end up losing that last game versus the Las Vegas Raiders, and that is how the Broncos got a record of 8-9 and barely missed the playoffs. So as we have now learned, it wasn't really Russell Wilson's fault that, his tenure in Denver failed. The first season was, again, a rebuilding season. Okay, he had Nathaniel Hackett, first-time head coach. It wasn't supposed to work. It wasn't supposed to be, a knock out of the ballpark. And then the second season, Sean Payton and Russell Wilson just weren't a match. And that has led us to where we are today. Catch y'all later. Much love. Deuces.